Peter Schweitzer division of Kimberly-Clark. He knew about Pacifica, and he had a radical proposal. A few years before, Schweitzer, an eccentric radio enthusiast, had bought a station for $34,000, subsequently offering New York City the latest music and intellectual programs. But he found the choice between losing money on quality and making a profit by going commercial personally frustrating in this case and philosophically untenable. The station's greatest success had come during a newspaper strike in New York. "That was not what I wanted at all," he told Winkler. "I saw that if the station ever succeeded, it would be a failure." So he asked, did Pacifica want it? For a decade, KPFA in Berkeley had been the only listener-sponsored radio station in the country. But after planning for 4 years and raising $200,000, the Pacifica Foundation had just launched a second station, KPFK, in Los Angeles, an independent operation with its own board, station manager, and local base of supporters. Pacifica had obtained the best site on Mount Wilson to run over 110 kilowatts of power, enough to reach 6 million people from Santa Barbara and Los Angeles to the Mexican border and San Bernardino Mountains. Now, without paying anything, it could own a completely equipped FM station in New York, the Big Apple, smack dab in the middle of the FM dial. It was a no-brainer, and it was happening, largely, because of two wealthy men. The station that ultimately became WBAI began lower on the dial in 1941 as WABF, a commercial station, but moved to the 99.5 frequency in 1948. In the early 50s, it was off the air for 2 years, but it came back in 1955 with call letters that reflected the name of its current owner, Broadcast Associates Incorporated, BAI. By the time Schweitzer made his donation, it was worth about $200,000. With KPFK and WBAI joining the flagship station, KPFA, Pacifica expanded rapidly from a station to a network reaching 3 metropolitan areas with a potential audience of 60 million people. But along with growth came challenges, and for too long the organization remained oblivious and largely unprepared. The fourth station added was KPFT, a full-power station in Houston with a signal that reached far beyond the boundaries of that growing Texas city, beaming talk and music to a multi-ethnic community along the Gulf Coast. There were 2 KKK-backed bomb attacks on the transmitter in 1970, but the station recovered and went on to become the first public radio station to broadcast programs in 11 different languages. For a while, it had one of the most eclectic FM formats in the country. The youngest of the 5 sister stations, WPFW, launched in 1977 as a source of alternative programming in the nation's capital. But the alternative in this case differed from the formula at the older stations. News and public affairs were part of the mix, but most of the airtime was devoted to music. The mission statement, while acknowledging the purposes of the parent foundation, reflected this local priority. Jazz, it said, a major American art form which grows from the African American experience, will be the major musical programming. WPFW will act as an archivist, educator, and entertainer on behalf of this underserved national cultural resource. Over the years, the station became one of the leading jazz stations in the country, along the way adding blues, reggae, hip-hop, world music, and other forms that reflected the evolving taste of its primarily African-American audience. But the most legendary station was WBAI. In 1965, it sent the first American reporter to cover the war in North Vietnam. Joining resources with the other Pacifica stations, it broadcast live anti-war teach-ins at a time when even the underground press wasn't receptive to feminism. It put groundbreaking shows like CR on the air. When Columbia students seized the campus in 1968, it covered the occupation uninterrupted. There was also Bob Fass's Radio Unnameable, a weekend collage of music, poetry, and talk, a radio version of the underground press. Identifying with the counterculture and the anti-war movement, Fass took his mic to demonstrations and invited movement leaders into the studio to discuss their plans. He ran the show like a switchboard, connecting people and getting them involved. He broke the mold and invented something new, freeform radio.
For millions of Americans and the national media, it was just another news day. But for hundreds of thousands of lesbians, gay men, and their friends, October 14, 1979 was the date of the National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights, the first such event in American history. On that day, thousands of people from all over the country converged on the nation's capital to march past the White House and to gather together at the Washington Monument for a rally of mutual support and celebration. In the spirit of significant past marches in the nation's capital, lesbians and gay men came to Washington in astonishing numbers to demonstrate to lawmakers and to the national press that the growing lesbian and gay movement for human rights and human dignity in the 1970s would continue to be a major social and political force in the 1980s.
What we really want to do with this march is build a national consciousness around gay oppression. Freedom is never given to anybody, and unless we continue in our effort without putting our energy and our direction into a further action, a further effort, we will not get our freedom because nobody's going to give it to us. We shall go forth from this place.
By the early 1980s, ideological splits were emerging. One came when Pacifica's first executive director, Sharon Maida, tried to secure corporate underwriting from Exxon. In response, Claire Spark, KPFK's scholarly program director, fired back by reading a resolution drafted by herself and other program directors on the air. The network and its station should focus on people who write books, she announced, not people who write bumper stickers. The argument foreshadowed the struggle ahead over control of programming and the direction of the network. A decade later, the match was clearly lit after Pat Scott became KPFA general manager, then executive director, joining forces with National Federation of Community Broadcaster President Lynn Chadwick on a Corporation for Public Broadcasting task force. She backed the idea that community radio should be more ratings-driven. For many Pacifica people, this was bad enough, but Scott went even further. On behalf of herself and the National Board, she issued a communique, and it said that anyone who wasn't ready to help the board change local programming to increase audiences was, quote, advised to resign. It became known as the My Way or the Highway Memo. 2 weeks later, the broadcast schedule at KPFA was dramatically changed. This included cancellation of established shows. The fight in Berkeley climaxed 4 years later in a lockout and massive protests. Before that happened, however, Scott's next move was the surprise takeover of KPFK and changes in its station management. This came to be called the Wednesday Night Massacre. A central figure in the struggle was KPFK General Manager Mark Shub, who held the job from 1995 to 2002, a volatile period and a remarkably long tenure. He was both respected and feared and became known for slamming doors and imposing programming changes. His local cadre, known as the Shubistas, also by their preferred label, the Third Faction. In 1996, Shub issued a directive ordering programmers and board operators to immediately cut the feed if anyone discussed dirty linen on the air. Non-compliance would result in permanently being removed from the station. Now, that phrase dates back to the 60s when abusing the air to discuss internal disputes was first prohibited. 2 decades earlier, the managers of KPFA had been fired for violating the dirty linen rule, but until Shub, the policy hadn't been much enforced. Disgruntled members of the growing Pacifica community saw it as a virtual gag rule. Anyone, employer or volunteer, who said anything about an internal disagreement would be automatically and promptly shown the door. For the next 6 years, Shub's rule remained in place, especially with dire results at KPFA and WBAI. It took a revolution and a court order to end that practice. And after a while, Shub got a nickname, the Gag Master.
Are you ready to go vote?
I'm ready.
What are you dressed as?
One of the Twin Towers.
What?
I want to scare people and help the president keep a supportive Congress. You know, I love the president.
I love the president.
Me too.
Me too.
Me too.
Me too.
Me too.
But one Twin Tower isn't going to scare anybody.
Oh, well, that's why I got you this.
Hey.
Yeah, slips right on. Huh?
And makes me look fat.
No, you look great. We're the Twin Towers. People will be scared.
People will think I look fat.
No, they won't.
I want to scare people as much as you do.
Well, I hope that's true.
It is true.
Well, I hope it's true.
It is true.
Well, I hope so.
It is true.
All right.
Because I love the president.
Well, I love the president.
Because I love the president. I want to scare people.
I want to scare people and keep a supportive Congress.
Right, and keep a supportive Congress.
Right.
Because I love the president.
Well, I love the president.
But you need a statement that's a little fresher.
Oh, something a little fresher?
Yes, take off the tower outfit.
All right. Well, you take off your tower outfit, too. I mean, I can't be one Twin Tower.
No, you can't be one
No.
Twin Tower. Okay, put on one of these. Here.
Put on one of these. Oh.
It's going to scare people at the polling place. Put it on.
Ooh. Gee, I think I'm scaring myself.
Ooh, you're scaring me.
Oh, good.
Here, I'll put on mine.
Ooh, wow, you look scary.
You look scary, too.
Well, we look scary.
Ooh.
You know, and wearing a costume to vote is an exercise of free speech.
Exercise of free speech.
Yeah.
Yes. The Bill of Rights guarantees every voter the right to appear at the polling place dressed as a...
Aha, a mushroom cloud. Yeah.
Towers are the past.
They're gone.
Mushroom clouds are the future.
Driving into New York City in February 2006 on the first leg of my orientation tour as Pacifica's new executive director, I thought about WBAI's past. Once one of the most innovative stations in broadcast history, winning awards for civil rights coverage and helping to define the counterculture. With a transmitter at the top of the Empire State Building, a signal that reached far beyond the city limits, and a roster of on-air voices second to none, the station's influence was profound in its day. But now it was at war with itself. It was like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, programmer Ibrahim Gonzalez told me. He said, complete with endless debates over the right of return, over who held the right to a time slot. As managers and hosts came at one another with lawsuits, purges, and fights over race and ideology, its audience was drifting away. A key player was Bernard White. Like many others with influence, he had been with Pacifica for decades. Raised in Harlem, White studied at Queens College and held a variety of jobs, including schoolteacher, before turning to radio journalism in 1978. For several years, he shared the mic weekday mornings with Amy Goodman on Wake Up Call, and then became BAI's interim program director in 1999. But the following year, in a controversial move, General Manager Valerie Van Eisler chose him to be a permanent program director. By the end of the year, however, White was fired, a casualty of Pacifica's Christmas coup. As happened again recently, Central Network Management and the National Board had taken over the station. They changed the locks, installed an interim manager, and gave a list of banned employees to the security guards. White and 24 others fired during this period ultimately returned to WBAI in 2002, but his next decade as program director was stormy. He had solid backing from the Justice and Unity Coalition, the strongest faction on the local board. The Black nationalist group embraced him as a determined anti-racist who put activist voices on the air. Amy Goodman considered him a comrade and a friend. To his opponents, however, he was a Tammany-style demagogue who abused his position to dismiss popular hosts like investigative journalist Robert Knight and health guru Gary Null. He commandeered the airwaves to criticize his opponents and frequently played the race card himself. Fairly or not, they blamed him for the station's listener and financial decline. As I said at the beginning, leading a media democracy isn't easy. Next time, legal troubles and democratic stalemates. This is Greg Guma with the People's Republic.